What we are seeing is very dangerous, but is this just brinksmanship between Beijing and Washington? Or are we staring at the prospect of potential war between the world's two large powers, China and the United States, come as early as August? That's really the window that we're looking at if Speaker Pelosi goes ahead with her visit, which is what looks like right now, and Beijing is refusing to back down on its threat. Joining us for this very important roundtable, we have with us perspectives from Beijing, from Washington, from India, and from Taiwan. I want to welcome first Dakota Wood, Senior Research Fellow, Defense Programs at the Center for National Defense at the Heritage Foundation. We have with us N.R. Tenjen, Senior Fellow at the Tahe Institute, Beijing. We have Dr. Bharat Karnad, one of India's leading military experts, at the National Security Expert at the Center for Policy Research. Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia is a former Director General, Military Operations, Director for the Center for Joint Warfare Studies. And Sana Hashmi joins us. She's one of our top experts on Taiwan, spends a lot of time understanding what's going on the ground in Taiwan. Remember, it's not just China and the United States, there's also Taiwan, which is what this current confrontation seems to be all about. Let's go across to Dakota Wood first for a perspective from Washington, D.C. on whether at this moment Nancy Pelosi will indeed go ahead with her trip to Taiwan, slated sometime next month. And if this does, is Washington ready for war?
Well, her office has not yet confirmed or denied the trip. So there is this rumor in Washington, D.C. that she will lead a U.S. congressional delegation. The makeup of that has not been explained. But everybody is kind of ambiguous in Washington, D.C. But since it's out there, preparations are being made to ensure security would be in place and all these sorts of things. It sounds like the White House is not entirely in favor of that. The Pentagon, our military department, initially expressed reservations, but they're in support, providing whatever resources might be needed. So everybody is waiting on Speaker Pelosi to confirm that, in fact, she would be going. If that happens, then everybody would be watching, and making sure that everything is handled appropriately, that security concerns are allayed. And it would be an expression of the U.S. Congress that the United States maintains support for the Taiwan Relations Act and really seeks that the differences between the government in Taiwan and certainly in Beijing resolve this peacefully without resorting to the use of force.
N.R. Tenjen, we saw in that statement put out by Beijing after the Xi-Biden call, saying those who play with fire will perish with that fire. We hope that the U.S. is clear-eyed about this. Beijing is indulging in a very high level of brinksmanship. How real are these threats? If Pelosi's plane does come to Taiwan, is it correct that the PLA Air Force intends to take it down? Or at least accompany it into Taiwan, which would again lead to conflict and confrontation?
Well, I don't think they're going to take it out, but definitely there could be an escort given that Beijing sees this as China's airspace. But, I noticed my colleague at Washington didn't mention whether the U.S. was prepared for war, and I want to make it clear that China is. And what I mean by that is that no leader of China, nor the Communist Party of China, could afford to give away Taiwan. And this is exactly similar to Ukraine. The U.S. pushed into there, despite everybody that they should respect, Kissinger, on down, including the current head of the CIA, who said that going into Ukraine would mean conflict. Going into Taiwan means conflict. So,
but this is just a congressional visit. What's the big deal? It's not as if this is a military delegation that's going in, or they are sending their planes to take on the PLA. This is just a political delegation going to Taiwan. What's the big deal?
Well, you could say it's not a big deal, but if somebody adversed you, Pakistan was flying into Kashmir, I think the story would be entirely different. I mean, this is about areas of influence. The U.S. agreed in 1973 that there was only one China. Beijing's point of view is that this is being changed. The frequent, warships going up and down the Taiwan Straits, the war that's going on in terms of economics, everything from technology to goods to naming people to blacklists. This does not infer good intent. Biden just said we want to manage our conflicts, but that infers that there are going to be conflicts. Taiwan is not one of them. The U.S. wants to play it as a card, and Beijing is not willing to do that. They can't. So at this point, I'd love to hear from my colleague in Washington whether the U.S. is prepared for war.
Okay, is Dakota Wood, the United States prepared for war? He says America may or may not be prepared for war. China certainly is.
Yeah, well, the basis of this discussion is just completely ridiculous. Comparing Taiwan with Ukraine, the U.S. going in and fomenting instability is just absurd. Ukraine is an independent, sovereign country. If it decided to lean west or to attempt to join NATO, that's for the Ukrainian people to decide. It was naked aggression on the part of Russia to invade and try to compel Ukrainian submission by killing its people and destroying the country. So comparing the two situations, again, is just ridiculous. And I think to your point that this is just a diplomatic or a political visit to the island of Taiwan that's completely in accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act. Yes, the U.S. government does acknowledge a one China policy. We've held to that for all these decades. But also part of the agreement was that we wanted these differences between the two peoples to be resolved peacefully and not a resort to war. So if China does decide to use military force, the terms of the Taiwan Relations Act we would help to enable Taiwan to defend itself. Is the U.S. military up to the task of engaging in some kind of conflict? If war was visited upon the United States, then the answer to that is yes. But to say that a visit of a couple of public officials from the United States is tantamount to a declaration of war is just absolutely ridiculous.
Bharat Karnak,
well, he can well say that, but that's the way Beijing sees it. So you can proselytize all you want and try to change history, but the fact is the U.S. agreed the Taiwan Relations Act only to provide military assistance in terms of defense. What is now happening, sailing U.S. warships up and down the Taiwan Straits, providing weapon systems that are not only defensive but offensive, is a clear breach of that agreement. So, you can characterize it however you want.
Now, this is a complete fabrication of history, and you're just mouthing talking points from the Chinese Communist Party. So there's nothing the United States...
I'm an American citizen, so I don't really take that.
The Chinese
read the Taiwan's Relations Act, and understand exactly what was said. So you can try to change history, but you cannot change the facts. You can accuse
Look, this
China
audience of watching this program is intelligent and educated. You can go to the same source material and see that this propaganda that you're spouting is just lunacy.
Okay.
So, again, you're just spouting talking points from the Communist Party. I'm actually more interested in hearing the opinions of the other two people who will probably provide a more rational perspective.
You don't really want to hear any facts, I understand, yes.
General Bhatia, if you were to look at it from a military perspective, do you think the Chinese military at this moment has the capacity to take on Washington, or are they just saying what they are in the hope that they'll be able to scare and stare Nancy Pelosi down?
I hope it doesn't come to that. It doesn't come to, it's brinkmanship which is going on, obviously. And the timing is very sensitive. We have the midterm election, the US coming in November. We have the October 20th Congress coming in. On Tuesday and Wednesday, Xi Jinping just called the party leaders and told them how good the party is doing, how good China is doing. And obviously, he's pitching for a third election. So I think China will go ahead, and when it says that there will be consequences, I think it means business, that there will be consequences, both the economic consequences, also military consequences, because China cannot back down.
Let's wargame this for a moment. Let's build on what NR Tenjen said. The PLA doesn't intend to shoot Pelosi's plane down, but they intend to cross the air identification zones in Taiwan and escort the plane in, which I presume would lead to a scrambling of the Taiwanese Air Force, and they'll have the F-16s up in the sky. would this end peacefully, or if they cross over into Taiwan, then the Taiwanese Air Force is likely to shoot the Chinese planes down?
I don't think it will come to that because there has to be maturity at both places. There's too much at stake. But the point is, there can be a spiral. We cannot rule out spiral. And when two mighty nations they are at each other, a spiral can take place, and it can also take place by accident. So I hope it doesn't come to that. But China, I think, should also respect the sensitivity to other nations. China is sensitive to the 3 Ts, Taiwan, Tibet, and East Turkestan. But the same thing, it should also respect the sensitivity to other nations like India along the LAC. It cannot have 2 rules, one for China and one for the rest of the world. So China also has to look inwards. And the US, in any case, as Bharat was trying to say, there's strategic ambiguity there. They want to go with Taiwan, but they have already declared that they respect the one China policy. So I think it is more brinkmanship which is going on, and we'll see more of it in the coming days.
You're considering this to be brinksmanship, not something
Right.
that could spiral into war of military conflict. Bharat Karnad, your sense, you're seeing very strong verbal pushback from Beijing. Would that lead to potential military conflict in your view?
Look, the problem is this. The status of Taiwan in US policy is ambiguous. The act that was mentioned earlier that endorsed the Chinese view of a one China principle and so on, really has great many, shall we say, ways to interpret it. And insofar as China has made it clear and keeps making noises and takes actions like transgression of the Taiwanese airspace and so on, with an armada of aircraft as they did the other day, you have a real problem in terms of the Taiwanese trying to maintain their sovereignty. Now, the US, in a sense, is committed to, in some ways, helping Taiwan keep its independent status. That's why it's able, even within that act, to supply weapons. When people say offensive and defensive weapons, I think that's a spurious distinction. Because as an Indian defense minister in the 50s, V.K. Krishnamenon said, he didn't know of a gun that fired in only one direction. Similarly, if you have, all kinds of weapons that can be turned offensively, that can be used offensively, even defensive weapons, so that difference is spurious. The problem is this. Both China and especially China, has gone really quite way out in trying to stake its position and committed itself to doing something serious. Should Nancy Pelosi and her congressional delegation go into Taipei. But then if they go ahead, and as Nancy Pelosi said, that the Biden administration fears that her flight will be ambushed and a plane shot down, then you have a real flashpoint there. Because the US can't then stand aside and say, oh, well, okay, that was not a good idea perhaps to begin with, but now that she's gone down, okay, we'll back down.
But remember, there are midterm elections in the US. There's a re-election that she is up for in October in Beijing. And therefore, whichever party backs down, there are genuine and immediate political consequences of that as well. Sana Hashmi, you've got 2 powers, and in the middle of it is the tiny state of Taiwan, a country that India and Indians like very much. However, from a Taiwanese perspective, how are people and the government in Taiwan looking at the brinksmanship that we are seeing from Beijing?
I think first I would give my personal opinion. I think Pelosi should definitely visit Taiwan, and what we should establish is that the House is different from that of the government. And as far as Taiwan is concerned, we haven't really received any statement from the government except from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a statement that we do not have any information from the US side yet. But I think it's also very important to consider what the Taiwan's view is. So, of course, there is no doubt that Taiwan will be welcoming Pelosi if she decides to come. But what is important to consider here is that if the US calls of the visit, it means that US is taking care of China's sensitivities while China is hardly reciprocating and at the same time neglecting what Taiwan wants from the US. So, of course, there is a dilemma for the US whether to ignore China's warnings and go ahead with the visit or try to avert the potential crisis by playing safe and discouraging Pelosi to not go to Taiwan. And this is what we saw when Biden stated that, which I believe it was very irresponsible of Biden to say that. But if Pelosi visits Taiwan, I believe it will be a great show of support for Taiwan, and she'll become the highest ranking US official to visit Taiwan since 1997. And I feel this is what Taiwan wants, and this is what Taiwan needs at the moment.
Dakota Wood, how much of a factor are the midterm elections in the United States and the fact that President Xi is up for re-election? Now, the midterms not so important for Joe Biden himself, but the re-election mighty important for Xi Jinping, which is also why he's going out and making these belligerent statements, because in Xi Jinping's head, China and the United States are now equal powers. He's not seeing the US as being superior or stronger to China.
Well, you cannot dismiss at all the domestic political situation in each country. So any kind of international action is always undertaken against the backdrop of what's going on at home. So we can't ignore that Speaker Pelosi, is concerned about her party's hold on Congress as we go into the U.S. elections this fall, just as Xi Jinping is concerned about what might be going on in Beijing within his party and his stature among the people, et cetera. So these are very real issues that you bring up. They cannot be dismissed. And I think that these statements that are being made and the posturing is largely driven by the effect that each individual wants to have back at home within the context of their political constituencies.
Does that add, you accept NR10 to Xi Jinping's desperation to be seen as strong, to be seen as being in control, to be seen as having stared Nancy Pelosi down, stared the American administration down right ahead of October? Is that also why we're seeing some extra belligerence from Beijing this time?
No, actually, you didn't see belligerence. I mean, the statement that Xi Jinping made was made many times before in terms of, you play with fire, you suffer the consequences. The fact is that most of his dialogue with Biden was about trying to take care of the rest of the world. The fact that the U.S., although it denies it, is in recession, and that the world is suffering from inflation, high food prices, high oil prices, a breakdown in the logistics system, and a lack of peace. And, if you look at all of those issues, they all trace back to the United States. So at this juncture, it's not about brinksmanship from China's point of view. It is about a bottom line. No leader of China, nor the Communist Party of China, can be seen to be giving Taiwan away. And these encroachments by the U.S. into
American speaker
Taiwan
visits Taipei. I don't see how that's equal to giving Taiwan away.
Nonsense. Excuse me?
I'm saying if a US speaker visits Taipei, I don't see how that's equal to giving Taiwan away, NR10.
Well, it's equivalent to that because right now they're arming Taiwan. They are also trying to insert Taiwan into the international sphere, although it was the US who kicked them out of the United Nations, who in essence said, look, you are no longer a country. All right? So going back on that, trying to get them back into different United Nations groups, having official contacts, that is not consistent with kicking them out of the United Nations. So the status quo is being changed. I know my colleague says that I'm echoing talking points, but I could say the same thing about him. The issue is, where are we now? The United States is pushing the envelope. It is not the Chinese ships who are sailing around the United States. It is US warships sailing through the Taiwan Straits. Why? Has China threatened to invade Taiwan? No. All right. The issue here is that the U.S. wants to destabilize China. It wants regime change. And in order to do that, it's attacking everything from Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Tibet, and Taiwan to do that. In essence, an encirclement campaign. It is the U.S. who has 400 bases surrounding the Pacific. It is not China that has bases surrounding the U.S. So ask yourself, who is the aggressor in this particular argument?
General Bhatia, I want to use your military mind to see what might happen if at all Beijing were to actually press ahead. Even if it doesn't lead to a full-scale war, you spoke of a spiral, how a military conflict builds up. what do you see potentially happening if Speaker Pelosi does indeed go ahead with her visit to Taipei?
I think the temperatures will go up, that is one. It also amounts to who blinks first. And there will be military activities, definitely. It will be military, it will be economic, it will be political also. Political is definitely there. And in the military mind, the spiral is the fear actually, because these things, when you have militaries of both nations, each one considering the other belligerent, China considering the US belligerent, US considering the Chinese, the PLA belligerent. So there is always a chance of a spiral, especially in the air and the seas. So the war plans would be out, I suppose. Both Pentagon and Beijing would be dusting the war plans, because this is a very major thing. I don't think Beijing is going to like it. It's at the time, just like you said and I said, October is the 20th Congress, so there are a lot of domestic compulsions. US also the domestic compulsions. So I think we are in for some.
Now the question is, who blinks first? Bharat Karnad,
who blinks first?
you're hearing what's happening on the show and seeing all that's being said and written globally. Who do you think will blink first? That is what I think it comes down to.
Well, look, I think there can be only two outcomes. If Nancy Pelosi is persuaded to, shall we say, scrub her trip and make up some excuse or the other, or postpone it, as Biden administration wants her to do, it'll be a victory political victory for China, because having gone this far and made it also public, this engagement, for Pelosi now to not proceed with the trip would be a political victory for Beijing. And
but can I argue that it's actually
China
much bigger than a political victory? It's like daring someone to war, Bharat Karnad. Then Beijing can believe that the whole idea that America will come to Taiwan's defense is out. We won. They can assume that as victory.
Let me just be very clear about one thing. I think the Chinese, if they think that it's going to be an easy stroll to go across to Taiwan and capture it, they'd be in for a great surprise. Taiwan is a porcupine and has been armed very well. It is very well motivated to, in a sense, keep off the Chinese main effort, however it comes. And by the way, the sort of landings that will be required to take on Taiwan in the first instance is going to be, going to have such heavy casualties for the invasion force that, the Chinese are going to be, very hugely handicapped thereafter in the second phase of the war.
Sana Hashmi, you spend a lot of time in Taiwan. Let's build on what Bharat Karnad is saying. Taiwan thinking of itself as a porcupine. We're seeing the valiant fight back of the people of Ukraine. Do you think that, given how much time you spend there, do you think the people of Taiwan are as determined to protect the little island if there is a PLA incursion?
No, definitely. And I believe that before Ukraine, there was still some, no sense of urgency for Ukraine, but after Ukraine, I'm seeing in Taiwan that people are talking about that Taiwan could be next. It doesn't mean that they're preparing for war, but there's a sense of urgency. Having said that, there is also...
No, but that's where national will becomes very important. Ukraine is outgunned, outmanned, but yet standing firm against Putin's excesses. Do you think the people of Taiwan have that fight in them? The army has that fight, the government has the fight to take on the PLA?
And then of course there is asymmetry, and we can't really say, and this has been reiterated by Taiwanese president as well, Tsai Ing-wen, that there is asymmetry. We are trying to build our capabilities. It's not that Taiwan doesn't know about it. Taiwan is working towards that, but despite that, there will be, the asymmetry will remain, and this is why there is need for Taiwan to diversify its relationship. And in the process, of course, US is one of the most reliable partners, and this is why this visit is very important for Taiwan as well. If it doesn't happen, then Taiwan, the commitment that US has towards Taiwan, Taiwan has to rethink about it then. So this is why it is also one of the important things. Taiwan doesn't have the capability to fight the Chinese. And there is realization even in the US, even in Taiwan, and even in Japan. So I believe this is one of the reasons why the visit has to go through, so that Taiwan is also sure that US will come to Taiwan's defense. And I believe that Pelosi's visit is even not as provocative as Biden's comment about defending Taiwan. He has talked about it at least thrice in a year. So I don't really find it.
He talks about it, and then the White House dials back and tries to dilute what the president said, even though what he said was said in full public view, which really brings me to the question that Bharat Karnad made about whether the United States is indeed serious about fighting for Taiwan? Or is this, given how far it is from the mainland, given how close it is to China, will they go to war? That, I think, is a critical question. But it's not just Taiwan that is being provoked at this time by China. You've got PLA fighter jets also coming very close to the line of actual control in the Ladakh sector. What we're seeing is they haven't crossed over the LAC, but very, very close, literally seconds away from crossing into the LAC, quickly turning back at this moment. And we've had several briefings of top officials in the military who are very concerned about what the Chinese Air Force is up to in the western sector in Ladakh.
China continues to tear in Ladakh, not just on land, also in the air. Chinese fighter jets have been flying close to the line of actual control. The aggressive forays in air clearly meant to provoke and send out a signal. And this happens as the two sides recently met for the 16th round of co-commander level talks. This is nothing but China's doublespeak. Disturbingly, such breaches have happened frequently in the past 30 days. Chinese fighter jets, including the J-11s, have come close to the line of actual control, violating the 10-kilometer confidence-building measure line. The Indian Air Force has responded firmly to these violations.
हमने काफी radar deployment की थी वहाँ पे high altitude areas में, all along is LAC. Chinese air activity वहाँ पे बढ़ रही है, तो हमने भी हमारे radar deployments और surface to air guided weapon deployment हमने भी बढ़ा दिया वहाँ. जब भी हम देखते हैं कि कोई air violation की संभावना है या कोई उनके जहाज उनके LAC के उस पार fly कर रहे हैं, तो हमारे भी जहाज हम यहाँ से scramble कराते हैं.
The Chinese have been carrying out exercises close to the line of actual control. Officials say this is when their fighter aircraft have come close to the LAC. The matter was taken up by the Indian side as per the established norms with the Chinese, and they were told to prevent any such incidents in future, sources said.
By deploying our air defense fighters, air defense radars, as well as the subliminal missiles, and enhancing the entire air defense capability in that area. With this, we are able to now get much earlier the early warning of the intruding aircraft, and thereby launch our aircraft, that is stimulate our jets to challenge these intruding aircraft and force them to go back to their own land. This is what is happening in the Ladakh area as of today.
The Indian Air Force is keeping a close watch on Chinese air activities after these incidents. Since the summer of 2020, India and China have been locked in a military standoff in Ladakh with over 50,000 troops deployed even during the harsh winters at heights of over 15,000 feet in eastern Ladakh. There have so far been 16 rounds of co-commander level talks, but a final resolution is nowhere in sight, even though there has been a piecemeal disengagement from some friction points. With Manjeet Negi, Bureau Report, India Today.
General Vinod Bhatia, how concerned are you by these PLAF, incursions so close to the line of actual control? Some officials, some army personnel I was speaking to say it's just a matter of a few seconds. If the plane strays over, we could be seeing a Galwan-like situation in the skies.
Yeah, definitely a matter of concern. I wouldn't say it's not a matter of concern, but then we are fully prepared. We have, in the past 2 years, we have shown a resolve.
You've been in the Director General Military Operations.
Yes,
is this common? Like, do they often come so close to the LAC?
This is the first time that we're seeing Chinese air activity along the LAC. In all my service, I have hardly ever seen a helicopter flying around near the LAC. And China, this is part of China's military position which it's been doing, and this is part of China's sharp power policy. And it's part of military position, whether it's Taiwan, to say that with the military consequences that India against the LAC, flying so close to the fighter. Of course, China felt that we had an advantage along the LAC as the air is concerned, and now it's trying to say that, look, we are also there. So it's a question of signaling which is going on by China. We are fully prepared to meet it, and China should understand that we have a resolve, we have the deployment, we have the employment, we have the capabilities. So that I leave it out there. It is definitely a matter of concern, but the fact remains that the two sides are talking. As long as we are talking, I see hope, and at the military level, at the political level, the diplomatic level.
Bharat Kanwal, your sense of the PLAF coming so close to the line of actual control, and an officer I was speaking to said just a matter of a few seconds, and it could happen willy-nilly. The pilot may just cross over, as sometimes it happens when you're flying so close to a border, and then all of India's defense mechanisms automatically kick into play.
Well, look, I don't know, the general obviously is better, he's better plugged in, but what I've heard is that they keep crossing the LAC, that they haven't kept to the LAC in any strict fashion. The helicopters, and there have been flying sorties that have crossed the LAC, and we haven't responded. And this is the problem. I think they are trying to literally goad us into doing something and testing how far we'll not react. What would they have to do for India to react? And this is very strange because we keep, in a sense, folding every time the Chinese provoke, and we do not react. And the Chinese become still more belligerent and still more confident that they can push us around.
General Bhatia, respond to Bharat Kanwal, who says we should push back harder.
I'm sorry, yes, you have to shoot the damn thing. What are your air defense missiles there for? We have placed the forward,
Bharat Kanwal, they're doing a Beijing on Beijing.
No.
Let's take I mean,
it's not so clear cut. We have to understand the LAC's line of perceptions.
Well, yes, but that's what we said. We were inconvenienced.
Not only even the Chinese say that. It's not so clear cut. It's not so easy. We have our defenses and we have preparations, and we are at it. Let me assure you through this, through your channel, that the Indian Air Force and the Armed Force are quite capable of holding on to China. China's trying. It's incorrect for China to do that, but it's violating the treaties, the 96 treaties, very, very categorically.
And remember, this time is very crucial, General Bhatia, because
I'm so sorry. So what is the treaty, General, that you're referring to? They have broken all the agreements that you have signed today. What are we talking about?
No, I'm not talking about the treaty still exists. They have violated it. Definitely, they have violated the treaties. So I'm not getting.
No, but remember, this timing is crucial because the S-400 missile defense system gets operationalized and deployed along the line of actual control in a couple of months, and therefore possibly China sees this as an opportunity, because once the S-400 is deployed, it's a very advanced Russian missile defense system, then India would be able to take Chinese fighter jets down if indeed they decide to cross. And
Rahul, the problem is this.
Well,
you don't need the S-400 to take out the straying helicopters, assuming they are straying and not actually aggressive into the Indian territory. You don't need the S-400. Our air defense systems that are out there that we have placed in the forward positions in the 14 core area, they're perfectly capable of taking out these damn things. So, I mean, the initiative lies with us. The onus lies with us to react.
And now, Shenzhen, what do you think is going on?
I mean, I always find it interesting that civilians talk about military matters. The fact is that Russia, just over an hour ago, announced that they would support China, and they were warning the U.S. against any kind of aggression. So this issue about who can shoot down who, that sounds very good. I mean, old men start wars, young men die in them. So, the issue right now is we want another sleepwalk into a World War I situation where you have great powers competing against each other. Does India really want a war with China? China is concerned, I think, that India will try to take advantage of the situation in Taiwan to do something. And this is the big issue. There is such distrust in the world today between the great powers that it is hard to mend. What we need now is for people to put aside all this talk of war and to sit down and start dealing with the real issues. And the real issues today are economic. People are going to starve to death. Countries are going to go without the ability to run their economies because they don't have the energy. And we have global warming.
It's very convenient of you to talk about the world food crisis, given that you've got your fighter jets coming so close to the line of actual control. I'll tell you what the military official I was speaking to said.
The issue here
so they haven't crossed over the LAC, but if they do, they would have had it. And that would be very, very complicated because the Indian Air Force is in a state of readiness and alert. And it hasn't happened yet, and I hope to God it doesn't. But we are in a very dangerous situation along the line of actual control and in Taiwan as well. Beijing flexing its muscles ahead of the Communist Party meeting in October. We've had an insightful conversation. We've got perspectives from Washington, from Taiwan, from Beijing and from India. We'll leave it to you to make what you think of this story, and I'll track what happens next. Remember, one of the two has to back down. I'm not sure who, but at this moment it looks more likely that the United States will find some way of scuttling this visit or announcing that they're pushing it back, because if they don't, we seem headed towards a potential escalation.